I don't know if y'all saw when Dwight was talking about, or there was a conversation about who's better, Dwight or Jokic. He was saying that in his prime, essentially, he would take himself over Nikola Jokic, you know, for a plethora of reasons. I would expect the player to say that, because why wouldn't a player say that?
Yeah.
And, you know, a friend of the show, Joy D'Angelo, is it D'Angelo? Joy D'Angelo, made this comment that got me thinking about a question. It's a serious question. It's a serious question. Yeah, serious question here.
Would you consider Dwight Howard generational in his prime?
No.
I think Jokic is generational. I love Dwight Howard. I don't have any issue with him putting himself in the top 10 center list, but I would not take him over Jokic.
He was dominant in terms of like dunking and being forceful. That's what you want a center to do. Get the attention and then kick out. When you have all those shooters around you, that's what you want to do. But what Jokic can just do, shooting threes, spread the floor. I think Jokic is better, but I don't mind that conversation because I think a lot of people forget how good Dwight Howard was.
Jump out of the...
Okay.
You ever seen somebody with a nose ring and was like, why do you have a nose ring?
That guy right there. The rest of the conversation really isn't relevant. And before we tell, you know, her to get back in the kitchen, I want to know what's y'all's conversation about generational. What does that mean? Because I thought, and I spoke to Joy, so, you know, we had a conversation. We came to a better resolution. What does generational mean if Dwight Howard is not generational?
Generational. I feel like a once in a decade type of player. What was it? She cute, just funny? Nah.
Answer the question. What does generational mean?
Once in a generation. Something that only comes across, you know, a couple times in a generation. I think Dwight is generational, you know? I feel like if you can say, like, you were one of the, I don't know, like, most notable figures in the NBA, not just from, like, a popularity perspective, but, like, a superstar that performed, was one of the marquee players in the league for like more than 5 years, I think you're generational. I'm going to say Dwight's generational. Jokic is generational as well.
I would say for me, what makes it go, well, I had a viewpoint on this earlier, but it did change. Originally, I would say if you're one of the best players, if you're one of the top 1% players once every 5 draft classes, so every 5 years, if you're top 1% of that draft class, you could be considered a generational player. But on Player's Choice earlier, shout out Mars, because he definitely had a great explanation of this. If telling the story of the NBA, if you can't tell that story without a specific player, for that era or whatever, then they're generational. So for the 2000s, if you tell the story of the 2000s era, so from 2000 to 2010, if you can't tell the story of basketball without mentioning that player, he's generational. 2010s to 2020, same case. If you can't tell the stories of that era without that player, there you go, generational player. If you can tell the story without them, they're not generational. Now, you can boil that down to what do you mean by tell the story of? You know what the fuck it is, but you can get to that nitty gritty because we had a conversation about Kawhi, and it's like, you can't tell the story of the NBA without Kawhi during that era, but at the same time, you kind of can. Like, you kind of can. It's kind of a gray area, low key.
Y'all know if you got 2 Finals MVPs, you really can't.
I mean, one of them extremely huge asterisk because that Warriors team.
No, I understand that, but the second one is like, all right, come on.
The second one is like, all right, but the first, even with the first one, it's like going back and looking at what he did in that series. It wasn't like he was putting up astronomically crazy numbers. He had one game we put up 29, and the whole claim of him shutting down LeBron. I don't know how you shut down LeBron. He averages damn near 30 points. I mean, yeah, it wasn't as efficient, but it wasn't like he was putting up terrible. He wasn't putting up terrible efficiency. Like everyone uses the efficiency argument for LeBron. He didn't have a terrible efficient series. He just wasn't as efficient as he usually is. Which, if that's making somebody a Finals MVP, I guess.
I'm just trying to see where that line is. So this is definitely going to be a nitpicky question on purpose. But would Ray Allen count as a generational player? Because I feel like
no.
That 2016
the thing is with that
was
clip that
crazy.
she was saying that Dwight wasn't generational and Jokic was, I think in a talent perspective, there has never been a player like Jokic where there has been many players like Dwight, even if not as like you know, oh, they didn't win 3 DPOYs or they didn't, you know. So that was where I think she was coming from in that clip. I think it's fair to say that he is generational though. And then Damo had said generational as in like, oh, like how you can't tell the story without the player, which you can't tell it without Dwight really. So so I think it's two different ways to look at it. But I would say that well, I don't know. There's multiple definitions. So I would say if generational is based off talent, that was my first thought was like, oh, because then Kawhi wouldn't be generational because there's been many players like Kawhi's played like a Jordan or like a, you know, like players that play like Kawhi. So I think that's a little bit too strict on the terms. I think he'd be a generational player based on how good he was.
How many guys from 2010 to 2020, how many players was as great of two-way players as Kawhi Leonard?
Nobody.
Exactly.
LeBron?
From a talent standpoint alone, I mean, and again, talent standpoint alone, there is an argument for Kawhi. During his reign, during his peak, there wasn't anybody as great as a two-way player. Offensively, he was one of the elites. Defensively, he was one of the elites. There's not really that would be generational for 10 years. If you're the only one or you're at the top of that list for two-way players, and it was at a championship level, Finals MVP level, two different teams, I would say it has an argument for generational.
So why did you say earlier that Russ wasn't generational?
And again, when I answered that question in Spaces, I was like Russ and Harden, no. But again, listening to how Mars described it, I subscribe to that belief. If you can tell the story without the player, then they're not generational. You can't talk about the 2010s without Russ and Harden, so they will be generational. I genuinely feel that. James Harden, third all time on the 3-point shooting list, MVP, multiple scoring championships, and dominated the league. Russell Westbrook, MVP, first guy to get a triple double since colored TVs was invented, I want to say, and again at one point dominated the league. Like great players, top 1% in the league at the time during their peaks. They are generational. You can't tell the story of the NBA without those two players.
Paul Pierce is generational. That's what I concluded.
No, what the hell is wrong with you?
Paul Pierce is not generational.
I thought Sage generally talked
over the button.
Can you tell the story of the 2000s without Paul Pierce?
Absolutely, be so.
All right.
Nah, you can't because he won a Finals MVP.
What does that mean?
So wait,
come on,
you
bro.
feel you can't
The whole
that's
Big Three Celtics.
Come
on,
that's
bro.
the most important part of the season.
I think you talk about the Celtics. I don't think with the Celtics with that 08 championship, the Celtics themselves, that Big Three in totality, that's mentioned when you're talking about the story of the NBA. You don't individualize Paul Pierce with them winning. Paul literally, who was the best player on that team? Was it Paul Pierce or KG?
Debatable. KG.
And the fact I'm about to say, if KG's the best player,
it's Kevin. It's Kevin.
KG's the best player, but Paul Pierce got the Finals MVP. You talk about that team or that core in terms of history of the NBA. You don't talk about just Paul Pierce.
Nah,
we had the conversation.
You talk about his Finals MVP. You talk about that 40 versus 40 piece versus LeBron. That's what you talk about, bro.
No one talks about that outside of Boston. Do you think Steve Nash is a generational player?
Yeah. Can you tell the story of the 2000s without those two MVPs? I say no.
You can tell the story. You can tell the story of the NBA without Steve Nash, but you can't tell it without the Phoenix Suns. Again, that's another unit. That offense was generational. That offense set the tone for the future of the NBA. That offense was before its time. Like it was. So you.
So you don't think Steve Nash is generational? I'm just clearing up. You don't think
Steve Nash is generational?
I think Steve Nash is. I mean, well,
just based off that criteria, bro.
I kind of lean towards my original. What's it called? Definition about saying it has to be a player that's once in a generation. I mean, I guess once in a generation, but also never kind of happened before. Steve Nash technically happened before multiple times, but I still think you win 2 MVPs. Like you can't. Well, to your definition, you can't explain the decade without him if he wins 2 MVPs.
Well, and I think the other thing that's important is you can't take out the context of everything else surrounding Steve Nash. So like you won 2 MVPs with Tim, with Shaq, with Kobe, with whoever else you want to say in that same conversation, playing the way that they were playing, and you were somebody that disrupted all of that and won 2 MVPs during that time with something that revolutionized offense. I do want to ask, with that being said, well, let me say this first. Paul Pierce is not generational. You've got to stop.
Thank you.
Those.
I'm just going off that criteria, bro.
Paul Pierce is Joe Johnson with opportunity.
Okay.
So
that sounds like a great player.
my question is, Click, do you believe that Dame is generational?
By the criteria of can you tell the story without him?
Whatever your criteria is, because I think that this leads to a greater point for me.
Wait, hold on. I just want to. This is not my perspective. Jesus Christ, please. I don't think Paul Pierce is generational. I'm just testing the lines.
Honestly, the way that the Dame play style, because the thing is with Jokic, the reason why Jokic is undeniably generational is because of the play style never being replicated prior to him. Dame, the only person that replicates his play style alongside him. I mean, obviously you could even reference like Gilbert Arenas, the generation before, with like, outside shooting or whatever. But when it comes to like the current generation, he did it right alongside Curry. So it'd be a little bit like, but we're not adding much context to any of these players. Like you just said, Paul Pierce is Joe Johnson with opportunity. in that reference, then Joe Johnson, you know what I'm saying? Like, so by, just base metrics, Dame wouldn't be, but like, then like, I like to give respect of, he's like, oh, well, maybe if he had a Warriors team one of the years, he would have won a ring. You know what I'm saying? He's a great, fantastic player. So, but I think by the just default, probably yes and no, but a little bit more no, I guess. I don't know. I guess. Yeah.
Dom Upchurch, Damian Lillard, generational?
I would say hell no, but let me just look up, just so I can be sure, let me just look up these other two players just to confirm what I already believe and think. Jesus Christ, this thing was putting up 13 threes a game? Oh my God.
Generational type shit.
No. I'm talking about James Harden at a 37% clip. So yeah. No, I don't think. Yeah, look at you. So no, I don't personally. I don't think Dame is a generational player. The argument, and I heard Lo make it earlier, it's his shooting, and even Click mentioned it because the only guy comparable would be Steph Curry, which I don't agree with. I feel like there's other players in terms of shooting the three ball that's comparable to Damian Lillard. Trae Young for a season, he had eight. Trae Young for a season was giving you 8 threes a game at a 38% clip. That's a high volume. I mean, yeah, Dame gave you 10 at a 37% clip, but we're talking about volume shooting. Trae did it. James Harden, again, 13 threes a game, playing 78 games, and he at a 37% clip. That's literally past Dame's volume. So unless you're about to say it's a ton of generational shooters in the league right now, which if you want to make that argument, cool, I don't think that you can say his shooting was generational because it's not as dominant. It wasn't his shooting wasn't as transcendent. Steph's shooting was transcendent. It did more for the game. It did more for other people. Dame is just a product of Steph opening up the game for everybody else to shoot like that, in my opinion.
Let me just ask you on the final verdict on Dwight. So you don't think he's generational?
I do think Dwight's generational. He was the best center in the NBA from at least a 3 to 4 year stretch. That late 2000s run, and got to the finals as the best center in the league. You can't tell it. Multiple 3 defensive player of the years, 4 defensive player of the years, whatever it was in a row. You can't tell the story of the NBA without Dwight Howard.
Interesting.
I feel like you got a trap card laid. You got that face.
Dave Cowan's generational.
Oh shit! Let's go, Click.
At that time, he was a generation talent at that time.
No, still, because you couldn't tell the story of the NBA back then without Dave Cowan. So is he still generational?
Yeah.
Ben Wallace.
He was a generation. He was a generational defensive player.
No. That's not the question.
Actually, I would say yes. I think Ben Wallace was a generational player. He falls under the criteria. You can't tell the story of the NBA without him.
Damn, that's a very low bar for a generational player. I don't know.
So Paul Pierce is definitely generational.
Come out. Wait. Then let me ask.
But Paul Pierce doesn't count.
Now, if we telling the story of the NBA,
wait. Hold up.
Come on. The Al Harrington shot.
Let me ask.
The comeback versus the Nets.
Ben Wallace. Here this guy.
Come on.
Ben Wallace is a defensive player whose peak was higher, Ben Wallace's defense or Paul Pierce's offense? Which one has higher peak?
Stop moving the goalposts, bro.
I'm not moving the goalposts.
That's insane.
I'm not. I'm telling you why Ben Wallace is generational. I think Ben Wallace defensively peaked higher. His defense peaked higher. He was better for what he was generationally, defender. His peak was higher, and it resulted into more than Paul Pierce, in my opinion. Again, I say Paul Pierce.
It's about peaks
when it
now?
comes to it's
no, what's up, bro?
when we're talking about Paul Pierce, I feel like you don't tell the story of the NBA with Paul Pierce. You tell it with the big 3 Celtics. Because without the big 3 Celtics, what the fuck was Paul Pierce?
All
He was just a
NBA player? Come on,
nigga.
dude.
He was a nigga getting buckets losing. That's all he was.
So if that's
he
the
was
case,
Kobe without Shaq. Like
if
I
that's
don't
the
know what
case,
to
do
tell
you
you.
What's
think
Ben Wallace without the Pistons?
Defensive monster.
No, I don't know. Actually, I ain't gonna lie. If somebody asked me to name another
Undrafted.
team, yeah, undrafted.
It was
Name a, so you don't think that he goes anywhere else? He's not going to be the same.
No,
type
because
of
he was
defensive-
other places. He was other
No.
places.
Not the same, but I mean, he'd still be good. I
similar.
guess.
How am I moving the goalpost? Somebody please tell me
Damo,
how am
I swear to
moving
God,
the
if
goalpost?
Ben Wallace was just a 4-time DPOY player who never made the finals and won that championship, you would not be saying he's generational.
he was
He's just a
under Dwight
4-time
Howard.
Wait. No. You know.
No, I'm saying like never made the
Bezos,
finals was
Bezos,
just
Bezos.
DPOY.
Let me ask you this: Is Rudy Gobert generational?
Fuck no.
Nah, that's
That's what I'm talking about. So Ben Wallace would have just been a regular
There
dude.
it goes. There
Has
it
Rudy
goes.
Gobert ever peaked like fucking Ben Wallace? What has his defense provided? What is his defense?
Oh
provided?
my
With Ben
God.
Wallace again,
The
I'm
goalpost
saying,
move,
I'm not
chat.
moving the goalpost.
Hey,
I'm
did he
not
have a
saying-
team with 4 All-Stars in 03? Like, come on now.
Come
He
on,
has
dude.
had one All-Star who's 6'1" and can't play defense. That's really it.
I'm never going. First of all, I'm biased when it comes to Baguette Biombo, so I don't know why we even doing this. And Omar knew that. That's why
Ladies
he said
and
it.
gentlemen,
I don't know what to tell you.
we got
I'll
him.
never give that bum credit. The fuck is you talking about?
Nah, I can't do that. Okay, so that
If he's generational, then Bismack Biombo's generational. Fuck that nigga.
L definition, and you know what? So I think that this is the problem, and I hope Missy Sage tweets on this later. I think that this is the problem, and I want to ask this last example before we move on because I don't want this to be a 40-minute clip of we just giving examples. Is Derrick Rose generational?
No.
You're telling me you can tell the story of the NBA without Derrick Rose?
Yes.
he might be.
Come on, the 20. All right, bro.
Is he the
All right, bro.
lowest? Click for you. So he would be like the lowest.
He's one of the
generational-
lower bars of generation. Yeah, because he's one of those dudes that like you could like comfortably say probably won't make the Hall of Fame, and you're just like okay with it because you're like, oh wow, but like or like you kind of like boggles your mind a bit. You're like, yeah, I guess not. So it's
He's gonna be the only player to win MVP in NBA history to not make the Hall of Fame. He's not generational.
I ain't gonna lie. If I'm Adam Silver, I'm rigging it up. You got to get in there. Fuck it. I'm not having that precedent. So my thing is, and I've talked about this before when we were in a space and somebody was talking about table setting, table dressing, or whatever the fuck it is.
That's a nasty profile picture.
It's a table dressing bullshit argument. You know, I guess it's cool apparently for NBA Twitter to bring up new words and use all these words and make them up or whatever. But if there's not like concise, agreed upon definitions for what the fuck, this word means or whatever, we may just not need to use it. I'm being so serious. Maybe we need to stay away from it. We got folks calling folks generational based off of telling the story, based off of impact over a certain amount of time, based off peak, et cetera, et cetera. Why the fuck are we using words that have so many definitions as opposed to just saying, hey, he good, that boy good?
Because it's basketball. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
All right, Kyle Kuzma. Like I don't know. I don't know.
when
what
KD
kind
said
of
that
shit
same
you want.
thing.
Yeah, hey man, that boy good.